Welcome to Faith and Science. I'm Dr. John Ashton. The other day I went out to lunch with some friends at a restaurant, and parked outside the restaurant was a Lamborghini car, and there were people, photographing the car, and different people were talking about the car and talking about what a powerful engine it had and so forth. I think it was a very late model Lamborghini. It certainly looked like it would go very fast. And I guess its sleek looks are really cool, but for a lot of people that, I guess, buy a car like that, one of the features is the powerful motor that is in the car, which means that, it has a very high top speed. Now, I'm not sure what the top speed of a Lamborghini is. I guess it's probably over 300 kilometres an hour, somewhere around there. It's classic. These are the motor and the machine, and the design of the machine is one of the very important and characteristic and expensive features of that car to give it that huge speed. One of the other things, of course, that I've noticed quite a few recently, particularly when I've been at the beach, I've seen people flying drones. And I read an article about a racer drone that had 4 propellers, and these propellers spin at really, really high speeds. I think it was 4,600 revs per minute. And it had a top speed of 283 kilometres per hour. And so this was a very, very complex machine. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that these machines, of course, are designed by engineers and a team of engineers using, a lot of maths and a lot of knowledge, the laws of physics, and, of course, the motors themselves. In the case of the drones, the electric motor. In the case of the car, it's a petrol engine. And one of the problems with car engines is that quite a bit of the energy is wasted as heat. So instead of being used to turn the wheels, this energy that is wasted actually heats the engine up, and so the engine then has to be cooled so it doesn't overheat. Now, one of the ways that scientists are working on is increasing the efficiency of motors is to reduce this amount of waste energy, particularly as heat, and somehow turn it more into motion. And so at the present time, as far as I know, the best gasoline or petrol engines are only about 30% efficient. In other words, only 30% of the energy that is there in the petrol, stored as chemical energy in the petrol, only 30% of that energy actually ends up driving the car. So that Lamborghini car would use a lot of extra energy, would be extracted from the fuel in order for it to use that 30% or thereabouts to generate all the horsepower to push it at its high top speed. But one way that scientists can improve, and engineers can improve the efficiency of engines, it seems to be, is to make them smaller. But this is one of the difficulties there becomes all the different parts of the motors have to work together perfectly, and it's very hard to make them so small beyond a certain point. So as they get really, really small, it becomes very hard from our present technology to make those motors. For a start, we have to use microscopes to see them and so forth. And, of course, this is work that's being done in the field of nanotechnology. And it's interesting that one of the scientists working in this area, James M. Tour, M for mother, in the middle there, is a very, very strong creationist. And if you Google James M. Tour, creation evolution, you can see some of the things that he said about these very small engines and in the nanotechnology and very, very small cars that they are working on. He actually leads a team of scientists that are looking at how they can build these tiny little cars that are powered by tiny little motors. And I think, if I remember the statistics right, they're so small that you could fit more than 1,000 of them on the tip of a pin. It might have been even 10,000 on the tip of a pin, these little molecular engines that they're looking to develop. But, each one of us has billions of motors in us that are much more complex than anyone can build. And these motors are in our cells. And this is amazing to think that these motors are in the cells in our body. The world's smallest motor that we know of is called ATP synthase. And if you look that up on the internet or in your biology book, this is an amazing little motor that actually rotates. And from what I read in an article, we have trillions of these in our body, and yet they're so small, they're about 100,000th of a millimetre in diameter. So these are very small. So a millimetre, as you know, is very tiny. So if you think 100,000th of that. So it's very important that these motors actually work, because they actually help to make the fuel that our cells run on. They help produce a chemical called ATP, which this is a chemical compound that actually provides food, the energy for our body to run on in our muscles. It's quite amazing, actually. It's very interesting that, again, I was watching a little while ago a movie about the Second World War in Germany, and of course cyanide was used as by some of the Germans as a way of taking lives if they were captured and they didn't want to be tortured anyway. They needed to die. And cyanide is such a deadly poison because it actually stops the ATP production. That's how it works very, very quickly, or one of the ways it can work. It also, from memory, my chemistry substitutes for oxygen in hemoglobin too, but probably the ATP production's the more serious one. This little motor is actually powered by an electric current, which is due to another part of the cell that acts like a tiny battery. And this little motor then spins at 10,000 revolutions per minute, or RPM. So that means, yes, it turns around 10,000 times in a minute. And each time it turns, it actually produces 3 molecules of ATP. Now, this little ATP motor is almost 100% efficient, because almost all the electrical energy that comes from that little battery is turned into ATP. Now, it can be argued that ATP synthase could not have evolved because you can't have evolution before you have a living thing that can make copies of itself. And every example of a living thing that we know of has ATP synthase in it. It's needed to live. So that's a very, very important point, really. So, we talk about, first life, first cells evolving, and people talk about, different chemicals coming together, in the environment, where they produce, lightning and strikes in an area where there's sort of a lot of pond rich in chemicals of some kind, and forms different, chemical compounds, and these compounds somehow come together and form the first living cell. Well, I've mentioned before there are so many reasons why that just can't happen statistically, and the types of chemical reactions. Well, one of the other reasons is that, again, all living forms of life that we know of have ATP synthase in them. So they have to have this complex molecular machine that spins that is powered by this little battery. And everything, before it can make copies of itself, has to have this ATP synthase. And another example of an amazing little machine in our body is called the kinesin motor, spelt Kinesin. Now, in our body, we have amazing chemistry in our bodies, absolutely amazing, chemistry. Matter of fact, the typical, sort of human biochemistry textbook is likely to be, in the order of, 60 to 80 centimetres, 80 millimetres thick, 6 to 8 centimetres thick. Just describing some of the biochemistry in our body. And so using this body, all these different biochemical reactions, our body makes all sorts of different proteins. Now, proteins are these molecules. We know we get protein from meat or legumes and nuts, and some in grains. And so we know that these are a particular class of compounds that our body needs, and we have to take them in as food. Our body then digests the food that is high in the proteins, breaks them down into the basic components, amino acids, and then our body can rebuild the proteins it needs from these broken down amino acids. So all the proteins are made from about 22 different types of amino acids that make up the protein. And so when we eat, peas and lentils or meat, our body breaks down, gets the amino acids out of those, and then synthesises those into the proteins our human body needs. And then, of course, our cells in our body make these particular proteins, all according to the code in the DNA code. But then these proteins need to get to their correct destination in the body. Now, that's where the kinesin motor comes in, and it's a walking molecule. And what it does is it actually takes the protein to the right place in the cell along tiny roadways, thanks to address labels that are there in the cells. And it's really amazing. This little motor, which actually stomps along, and again, if you Google, go to creation.com /kinesin, Kinesin, all one word, so creation.com kinesin, you can actually see a video of this kinesin motor and how it actually walks along, and it actually takes the proteins to the right place in the cell. And it takes 125,000 steps to move 1 millimetre, but it moves 100 steps every second. So it takes a step in 100th of a second. And so ATP, again, and it's absolutely amazing to see some of the animations that they have developed to illustrate how this amazing step or walking machine works that's in our body. And again, if we, scientists and so forth that subscribe to evolution have to believe that these amazing machines that work occurred by chance. And so these kinesin, as it moves along, it can carry actually sort of like a bag of proteins as it's moving along. Now, the amazing structure of these things, and again, so that they can work on the pathways and all these sort of things, to me is just overwhelming evidence for design. So I work in a research laboratory that's associated with an engineering development works where engineers design new machines and the amount of effort that goes in, and the different specialties of engineering that go in, and then the tradesmen that build those machines with high precision to the plans. And sometimes as the machines are being built, they have to make modifications to them and so forth to improve them. But it all is as a result of intelligent design, not blind chance, not somebody decides to drill a hole in a different spot, but just blindly, I think we'll have a hole here, so I drill a hole here. Let's put a bolt through here. You're not going to end up having a machine that works doing that. Everything has to be designed. Everything has to be in its right place. And it's the same for these molecular machines in our body. It's all interesting. There are of course, different types of cells. So all the cells in plants and animals are called eukaryotic cells, and these have a nucleus. But bacteria cells are prokaryotes, and they don't have a cell nucleus. So all the eukaryotic cells have kinesin, and so essentially these little motors would have had to have been around pretty well at the beginning as well. I think that when we think of these incredible motors, to me it's just overwhelming evidence that we have a creator, designer, and why scientists and the education system today wants to keep this evidence of creator away from young people today. I really can't understand, because the evidence is overwhelming that we have a creator. There is a superior intelligence in the universe to us, and he's responsible for us. And of course that's why the Bible refers to him as our Heavenly Father, because he made us. And the Bible also talks about this particular intelligence, God, that created us, is non-material. He's not made up out of atoms and molecules. He made atoms and molecules. Another amazing machine, and we often don't think of it as a machine perhaps, but it's the feathers that we find on birds. And we find a little feather on the beach, people don't look at it, it's, pretty seagull feather maybe, or little bird feather we might find at home, or in different places we find some really pretty, feathers with beautiful colours. And of course, a lot of people are into birding and watching birds and all the amazing different types of birds that there are. And of course, in Australia, we have a lot of quite colourful birds in Australia, and some of them are very small. But the feathers in birds are, again, another amazingly engineered structures. They're strong, they're lightweight, they're aerodynamic, and even when ruffled, they can be preened or stroked back into shape readily. And this comes from the amazing design in their intricate architecture. So feathers have this long shaft down the centre called a rachis, and out from this comes some barbs, which in turn have little barbules. These are the tiny little things that you see there on feathers that clip them together, the little barbs together. And in flight, in flight feathers, the barbules have hooks that link them to adjacent barbules. And, of course, evolutionists used to teach that they came from reptile scales. But, of course, this has now been discredited. It's probably still taught that, the feathers came from dinosaur scales or something. But one of the articles that was published actually in Evolutionary Biology some time ago, it says, at the morphological level, feathers are traditionally considered homologous with reptilian scales. However, the development or morphogenesis, which is the shape and form, and gene structure and protein shape and sequence and filament formation and structure in feathers are different. And that's a very important point to note. People can say, maybe the scales, on the dinosaurs, and you see this pushed all the time, slowly evolved into feathers. But the bottom line is totally different DNA. The DNA to make a feather is totally different to the DNA to make a scale, reptilian scales, and they're not related, the DNA. So again, we're getting these stories that are told all the time, but when we drill down and look at the hard scientific data that we can analyse, we find that, hang on, it doesn't work. But these little stories are very simple. I mean, to say that a feather evolved from a scale, a dinosaur or a reptile scale, is very easy. Young children can understand that. Once they learn about, lizards and scales and know what a scale is, feel the scaly skin, and they know what a feather is and that it's solely changed, that, they believe that. And then they're stuck with that without it being revealed that, hang on, these scales are made as a result of a code in DNA, the DNA code. And the DNA codes are so different that one didn't change into the other. And this is, it's sort of really, I guess for me it just seems morally so wrong that we continue to teach these stories to children when we now have growing scientific evidence all the time pointing to unique creation. But let's have a look at, well, I'm getting off track here a bit, let's have a look at the feather, why it's so tough and able to withstand the forces in flight. Because you think the feathers up there, they spread out, they hold that air pressure and support the body of that bird. And it was interesting, some research that was published only a couple of years ago now, in 2017. It was published in Nature, Scientific Reports. It was a paper by Lingham Solier and Solier, T. Lingham Solier. It was called Microstructural Tissue Engineering in the Rashes and Barb of Bird Feathers, and it was published in Nature Scientific Reports in 2017, number 7. And the reference is 7:45162, 217 Nature Reports. And another one is in Evolution News on the 31st of March 2017. Heading was "Feather Design is Better Than Thought." From memory, they're reporting the essentially the same thing. And so this was research that came out of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in South Africa. And what they found is that there's the rachis itself is composed of very special fibres of keratin that run down its length, and they're held together with a special glue-like substance as well as by little hooks and rings. And so there's a double design strategy there. And this, the rachis, of course, is thicker at base and it tapers and gets thinner. And so if these little fibres were totally parallel, and hundreds of them, they would need to end before the tip. But at each of those ends, and each of those ends would concentrate the stresses that could start a break, much like you can tear a plastic packet much more easily if you make a little cut or a bite in it to start. I know of cutting builder's tape, you just got to make a little nick in it and then it tears quite easily. But what this researcher found was that going towards the tip, these things don't terminate in the rachis. Instead, what they do is at regular intervals, these little fibres either deviate to the left or the right and enter the barb so that the shaft has fewer and fewer of these fibres as it tapers off. And this avoids the problem of crack-like defects and reinforces the overall structure by deeply rooting the barbs into the rachis itself. Now, I know that sounds a bit complicated when you just talk about it, but it's actually designed in the paper. The comment that was made by the author was the solution is biomechanically ingenious and novel architecture of the fibre organisation. So here again we see this amazing structure that gives that centre part of the feather amazing strength, but strength in such a way that it minimises the chance of cracking that could then lead to the feather fatigue and breaking. And this is really, when you think about it, it's an amazing design. And I guess if I think about it, if I was making some, I'd just run all the fibres through without, of course, not being a stress engineer. I wouldn't know that, hang on, that's going to lead to excess forces on the end and increase the risk of stress fractures at the end. But we've got to remember that evolutionists claim that this feather design is blind chance. But yet it's a perfect design. It's a design that the researchers are saying, this is absolutely brilliant. And how, of course, they claim that these structures are a result of, perfections over millions of years. But how could you have, this partially evolved, flight? Why would these feathers be developing in partially evolved, flight before the birds were fully flying? And you have to have a fully formed feather for the birds to be able to fully fly. And so it's interesting that there's a similar sort of structure in wood, and the xylem fibres in wood, a major component of wood, undergo a similar diversion from the stem to the branch. And of course, this can't be explained. So we find a similar structure here in plants. And so we see that, again, scientists look at this, and we think just that the humble plant, but again, the way the fibres are arranged in plants give them this additional strength even as the plant tapers off. And to me, these are just classic examples that speak of a super intelligent designer. And of course, there are many, many other scientists that recognise that. And of course, if anyone's interested in reading up on these, my book, In 6 Days, Why 50 Scientists Choose to Believe in Creation, is available. And again, if you go to creation.com and do a search in the search engine for In 6 Days, the full book will come up there and you can read these reasons. Remember, if you'd like to listen to this article, this talk again, and check the references, just Google 3ABN Australia, all one word, .org.au, and click on the listen button. I'm Dr. John Ashton. You've been listening to Faith and Science. Have a great day.
You've been listening to a production of 3ABN Australia Radio.